Here is Mauchly's test of sphericity, excuse me, and here's the W value, all right, for the test itself. I'm not sure actually what this data was from. If it was, I think this is just generic data. I don't think it was from the inner voice study. All right, so here's Mauchly's W. Now we want to look at the sig value for this W. So what is the probability of this particular test statistic? All right, and we can see that it's less than 0.05. So it's significant, and because this is a test of assumptions, we are now sad. All right, we don't want our asses to be significant. It is significant. That means we don't have sphericity. And where do sad people look? They look down. So instead of looking at this row of results, sphericity assumed, you look down at this row, greenhouse geyser. All right, so the independent variable is here. So if this was the inner voice experiment, I would put inner voice here. So I would label it correctly. Just wouldn't be a generic independent variable. And here is your error term. So this one here, all right, this is the one, if we're going to look at the variability here, this is between group variability, and because it's the effect to be tested. And this one down here, your error term, that is within group variability. Okay, so we've got a significant test for our assumptions. So we're sad, we look down. So that means we're going to look at this row here and report these degrees of freedom for the corrected greenhouse geyser results, and you report them to 2 decimal places. If this were for a publication, you can round. They tell you can round. But I want to make very sure that you are reporting the degrees of freedom for greenhouse geyser. And so I tell you to report to 2 decimal places. So these are then the degrees of freedom for the effect to be tested, so whatever your independent variable was. And then for your error term, you would report the degrees of freedom for that, the greenhouse geyser corrected degrees of freedom. So it would be 7.05. All right. And again, if this was, a journal that you're submitting to, they will let you round. So they'll let you round to 7, but don't you do that. Okay. So here are the 2 numbers that I need to report for degrees of freedom. And remember that the smaller one goes first. You can also remember the alphabet. This is between groups, within groups. B comes before W. Okay, so that's another way of thinking about it. Here is the F value for your particular experiment, all right, your particular independent variable, whatever that was. So the actual F value, and here is the sig value and your partial eta squared. All right, so you can see from this that what did greenhouse geyser do? It reduced your degrees of freedom, right? Because if this was not significant, you could have looked at, or you should look at sphericity assumed. So you would have had 2 degrees of freedom here and 14, 2 and 14. Well, you had to give up some degrees of freedom because of your violation. And so now your degrees of freedom were reduced to 1.01 and 7.05. So you see how you lost a lot of degrees of freedom. Fortunately, it didn't have any effect on your F value. And contrary to what we would have expected, it actually gave us a lower sig value. That typically does not happen, okay? Typically, what we will see is with less degrees of freedom, the sig value will actually go up, all right? And it didn't in this case. Sometimes the statistics don't behave like I expect them to, but it is what it is. Here is your measure of effect size. So it would be 0.132. You report these to 3 decimal places. So in other words, we could say, now it's not significant, the treatment effect is not significant, but we can say that whatever our independent variable is, it is explaining 13.2% of the variability in our scores for the dependent variable. It's explaining 13.2% of that variability, okay? So whatever this IV is, it's explaining that much of the DV. But it wasn't significant, so even with what we see here to be a very high effect size, in actuality, this could just be sampling error. Now, it was a long time ago I generated this table. It might have been from fictitious data. It probably was a fictitious data that I ran. And sometimes with fictitious data, you don't get what you're looking for because it's made up data, and humans can't actually make up data at random by ourselves in our head. They've actually done studies on that, and we show biases that we're unaware of. All right, so if there was no violation here, remember to look at sphericity assumed. So your degrees of freedom would be 2 and 14. Your F value is here, your sig value, and your partial eta squared.